Welcome, everybody. It's great to have so many people joining us for our closing plenary. And I'm going to start off by acknowledging that the University of Michigan, named for Michigami, which is the world's largest freshwater system located in the Huron River watershed, was formed and has grown through connections with the land that's stewarded by the Nishnawbe, Ishkade, and Anishinaabe, the three Fires people, who are the Ojibwe, Odawa, and the Potawatomi, along with their neighbours, the Seneca, Delaware, Shawnee, and the Wyandot nations. I want to just begin by outlining how our Zoom gathering is going to be structured. I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then I'm going to turn off my camera, but I will be present even though I won't be visible. I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A, and I hope that you will take your time throughout this talk to add questions to the Q&A, and I can then present them to our two speakers. After our two plenary speakers have finished their discussion, we'll have plenty of time to expand into a wider discussion based on your questions. So at this point, I want to welcome Cristóbal Martinez and Liz Lerman, who are going to be in conversation, talking about our fathers, crimes, and the nature of energy in the universe. In this keynote, the artists and scholars, Liz Lerman and Cristóbal Martinez, tell and unpack a set of stories in prose and poetry of their of their personal relationship with physics as a science. They recount and reflect on the impact of science on land and family. Within a context of worldviews proximate and vexed, they engage in conversations about science in relation to confusion, consequence, and crimes. Cristóbal Martinez, PhD, Mestizo of the Genizaro, Pueblo, Manito, and the Chicano heritages of northern New Mexico, is chair and associate professor of art and technology at the San Francisco Art Institute. In 2003, he co-founded the indigenous-led artist hacker performance ensemble, Radio Healer. And in 2009, he became an artist in the interdisciplinary art collective Post Commodity. In 2018, he co-created the experimental electronic music duet, Red Culebra. Martinez, along with his collaborators in Post Commodity, have shown work in the 18th Biennale of Sydney, the 2017 Whitney Biennale, the 57th edition of Carnegie International, and in Documenta 14. Achievements by Post Commodity include the historic 2015 ephemeral land artwork, Repellent Fence, Valle Repellente, at the US-Mexico border near Douglas, Arizona, and Agua Prieta, Sonora, Mexico. Winner of the Fine Prize and a 2017-18 Ford Foundation Art of Change Fellow, Martinez has dedicated his life and career to interdisciplinary collaboration in contemporary art. Martinez and his collaborator, Cade L. Twist, are currently presenting an exhibition, Time Holds All the Answers, by Post Commodity at Remai Modern Museum in Saskatoon, Canada. Post Commodity create art that personify a shared Indigenous lens and voice, examining aspects of 21st century life to inspire a uniquely Indigenous futurism. The exhibition by Post Commodity is composed of 8 works, 7 of which are new large-scale commissions. This is a culmination of years of preparation, as well as important negotiations with the museum and conversations with the Northern Plains Cree elders, and it runs from September the 18th through to January 23rd, 2022. Christabel is going to be talking with Liz Lerman. Liz Lerman's a choreographer, writer, and speaker, the recipient of a 2022 MacArthur Genius Grant and the 2017 Jacob's Pillow Dance Award. She founded Dance Exchange in 1976 and she led it till 2011. Her dance theatre works have taken place on stages around the world, as well as in shipyards, hospitals, schools, congregations and facilities serving veterans. She's been commissioned by the Kennedy Center, the Lincoln Center, and Harvard University Law School, amongst others. Since the turn of the century, Liz Lerman has been collaborating with scientists in research, performance, and pedagogy. Her current projects include building the Atlas of Creative Tools, an online digital commons, and Wicked Bodies, which is set to premiere in 2022. Liz is a sought-after teacher of critical response process, creative research, the intersection of art and science, and the building of narrative within dance. Liz is a fellow at both the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts and at the Center for Study of Race and Democracy at Arizona State University, and a former fellow of the Robert W. Deutsch Foundation. She's currently an institute professor at Arizona State University. Liz and Christabel, welcome, and over to you to talk to us about our father's crimes and the nature of energy in the universe.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here on what I hope is a beautiful Saturday, wherever you are. For us here in Arizona, the weather is just beginning to change, and it's an astonishing thing when it happens. I'm going to make a tiny correction. I never really talk about the MacArthur much, but it was 2002. But it's just the first correction that's going to happen today. There are going to be lots of corrections, I know, because when I spend time with Christabel, I am always changed. I'm always being asked to reconsider and rethink and revise and re-bring myself into the present. So again, thank you all. You know, I love it when I actually can remember an origin story. The one I want to begin with, I don't have the exact place. I like to know the person, the place, the time. What I know is that I was in Australia on tour, that I was at a party, that the dance community had come together, which was wonderful, including Indigenous folks, people from ballet, contemporary forms. Chatter, chatter, chatter. When I left that evening, somewhere, someone had planted this idea, a way to think about time, that the past is in front of us, the future behind. This was unnerving in a way, unbalancing, but now that I'm the age that I am, and given an opportunity like this one to reflect a little bit, I find it really useful. A way to, it's almost as if I had a tapestry of all my work and I could, you know, unfurl it like you do when you have a fresh sheet and you put it out. And then just to pull at the threads of some of the concerns that this conference has been addressing. So that's what I did. I sort of threw it out and said, and the threads that I pulled at, not necessarily to conflate them all, but to look at. And surprising to me was the number of times in my work I had addressed nuclear energy, nuclear war, and nuclear waste. And so with your permission and yours, I'm going to just dive into describing just a couple of these, and along the way, some of the aspects of research. I think of research as nourishment. I think it's an extraordinary thing we get to do. In my case, I think of it as creative research in the sense that it's a little loopy. It comes with me, I let it go. Sometimes I can pursue an idea for a while, it doesn't work. Very often it's the rehearsal room that's the editor, not what is makes the most sense. And so perhaps along the way, you'll see how these things form and unform. I'm going to start with a group of dances that I made in the 1980s. By then, my mother had died rather suddenly of cancer, and I had addressed already grief, mourning, and death. I'd already addressed dances about love and even identity. And in Reagan's time, I started thinking, actually, I need to make dances about politics. I need to address what was happening. And to me, having grown up in a radical household, it was personal. It wasn't theoretical. It was as personal as grief, as personal as love. And so I set about that task. And there are a few of them, but I'm going to start with one that I did in 1983, which was called 9 Short Dances About the Defense Budget and Other Military Matters. Now, by then I'd come to the conclusion that if I didn't understand something, if I couldn't get it, if somehow I couldn't comprehend it, if I made a dance about it, okay, by the time I was done, I'd know something. Maybe not everything, but I know something. And so living in Washington, D.C., where I lived at that time with my company, I cannot even figure out what $1 billion is. Like, I just couldn't comprehend it. So actually, I made the 9 short dances. They were only 8 because I couldn't get one of them to work. And one was a song, and the song addressed that question of $1 billion. And one line, it was something like, if Jesus Christ was still alive today and had spent $1,000 a day, he still wouldn't be at 1 billion. Just trying to give people a sense of the scale. But there are 2 dances in this that I want to just mention. One was, I set the map of the world on the floor, and I just moved over it, touching as I could each the continents, the islands, the spaces, the places. And I ended up in that place that Sarah Palin made kind of famous, that area right between Russia and the United States. And I, let my body be a bridge over that. And then I just said, well, there are missiles pointed at every square inch. It's personal. I'm of the generation where when we were 3, 4, and 5, just starting out in school, we were under our desks. We were practicing for the bomb. 3, 4, and 5-year-olds know a lot. They dream a lot. They take in a lot. And since I'm interested in the body being under a desk, like I say, it's personal. And I think that's partly what was driving those dances. The other dance that I'll just say consisted of a big ball of string on the ground, and the choreography was actually the way in which I could unwind the string. And basically I went like this: it won't happen because people are too smart. It won't happen because the world is not supposed to end this way. It won't happen, well, because I'm doing this dance. It won't happen because, and of course the string runs out. It's hard, perhaps not so hard to imagine what it was like in those times and the fear that people were living with around what might take place in the missile architecture of our universe. I made a dance soon after that called Power, based on 3 Mile Island and that disaster. The dance is unremarkable. But what I want to remark about was my brother's music. My brother's a sound artist, and he was dressed in a safety suit. Well, he had to, because he was playing a blowtorch, on which getting the blowtorch into the Kennedy Center was by itself a remarkable hack. But anyway, and he had hung these tuning forks. And he basically takes the blowtorch up to the tuning fork. And it turns out if you hold it there long enough, the molecules inside the tuning fork change. And this incredible sound comes out. Kind of beautiful, kind of scary. The thing is, you don't know when the sound is going to happen. Precisely right for how we were experiencing the aftermath of 3 Mile Island. But the piece I kind of want to get us to, there are 2 that I really want to spend what time I have on it. One is called Atomic Priests. And some of you may remember this, and maybe some of you are too young to know, but the government convened something called the Human Interference Task Force. And this group of people were challenged to figure out what to do with nuclear waste. Like, if we buried it in the mountains, the problem from their point of view was, what if people, how do you keep people away from it? What if people aren't speaking English anymore? Because, by the way, it takes 10,000 years. They actually proposed that we needed a priesthood and possibly a series of myths that would help people stay away from the sites. So I believe that, I believe the commissions are everywhere. I'm not saying the money's everywhere, but the commissions are everywhere. And I took it on. And we did in fact make a myth. And we brought to life the opening paragraph of the report, which goes something like this. And it was sung in a Gregorian chant because after all, it was priestly. The disposal of radioactive waste in deep geologic formations. And then the dancers, it was kind of call and response. They'd go, uh-huh. And then it would continue. Means isolating the waste from people until the radioactivity has decayed. That might take at least 10,000 years.
Uh-huh.
That's exactly right. And the dancers would go, uh-huh, or okie dokie, or you betcha. And there's something in that. It's of all the pieces I've made, it's one of the ones I most want to revive. I was pregnant at the time. And I raised this too because I live now with so many of my friends with young children who are terrified about the world that they're leaving, terrified. And I remember as we made this piece, and I'm carrying this, what has become my beautiful daughter, I remind us over and over, it's personal. It's personal. So I mentioned creative research, and I know most of you are all engaged in the same thing, so I don't need to go into it in too much detail, but other to say that in my case, there's something about carrying the ideas around for a long time until they come to land. So the origin for the piece I want to talk about now, which is going to bring me into relationship with Cristobal, is a piece called The Matter of Origins, and it began at the University of Michigan, actually. We were touring a piece about genetics. And afterwards, I was approached by the wonderful physicist, Gordy Kane from the University of Michigan. He said to me, we'd like one. And would you come to our physics department meeting tomorrow? And I did. I wasn't actually interested at the time, but I did go. And I'll just say that one thing I loved is that all the physicists were there on time and all the dancers were there on time. And I had a notion, oh, we have something in common, something about time. The upshot of this meeting, though, was that they said that I should go to CERN, where they're smashing the particles, because they're going to figure out the origin of the universe. And I said to Gordy, yeah, but what about the other origin stories? What about all the ways that people hold their beliefs? And to his credit, really, and to everyone in the room, there was an acknowledgement that this was actually an issue, something to consider. I did go to CERN. We put the dancers in the tunnels, all of that happened. But I had begun now to think about making a piece about the nature, well, of matter or of origins, or even how we consider the beginnings of things. I had come to the conclusion while I was over at CERN that actually the origin of CERN was Los Alamos, that you couldn't have CERN without Los Alamos. Big government, big science, big money, big questions. But that wasn't what was driving me. That was not what was driving me. I decided to pick up over the summer a light read, American Prometheus, the book about Robert Oppenheimer. It's a really interesting, very big, fat biography. There was one page in that book that really caught my attention, first of all. It's a paragraph about a woman named Edith Warner. When Oppenheimer was out there, you probably all know this story, but within a 250-mile radius of where they were going to build the bomb, they canceled all of the businesses, all of them, except for one, hers. She ran a little tea house. She lived in the Pueblo. She ran a little tea house. She served a certain kind of chocolate cake. That was her recipe. Oppenheimer hired her to feed the physicists. And once a week, if you were lucky, you would come down the mountain and you would have dinner in her home. She thought Niels Bohr was Dr. Baker because, of course, it was all secret. We know all of this only through her Christmas letters that she sent home. So I had begun to conceive a piece in which Act 1 would be in the theater, but Act 2 would be tea. And we would all sit around and there'd be a scientist and an artist at every table. We would eat Edith Warner's chocolate cake. She would, the dancer playing her, the beautiful Tamara Pullman, would preside. And I found the whole thing charming. So I would like to just read to you two little excerpts from this, because at the same time, again, acknowledging now I'm no longer a 5-year-old under a desk, but reflecting back on my middle school years. And perhaps some of you remember this, but you know those biographies we all had to read, the little orange books, and they have a little black silhouette on the front. They were all men, except you've got Florence Nightingale, you got Clara Barton, and Marie Curie. And from a feminist perspective, I have to say Marie Curie became one of my heroes. And this did make it into the piece. Many things didn't, but this is a little excerpt from her diary. It's not a direct, we played with the language a little bit, but it goes like this. 1 ton of pitch blend, 50 tons of water, 6 tons of chemicals yields 1/100th of an ounce of radium. 3 years of work yields 14 ounces of radium. I kept a little vial by my bedside. Its blue, glowing green lulls me to sleep like fairy dust. So just take that in for a minute. And there's more to it if you're interested and you don't know about her, but the physical labor involved in the way she did that. Edith Warner also, as I said, was in the piece, and I thought I would read you because this followed that little thing I just read. We moved from Marie Curie's lab to the mesas, and you see the mesas of Los Alamos and the dancers moving, and this what I consider a beautiful phrase. And this is taken from a note that Edith wrote in 1943. My friend, Mr. Oppenheimer, stopped by with some other scientists. My contact with them is necessarily casual, but interesting. There is so much I would like to know better. How long they will be here is as secret as what they are doing. There is tension and accelerated activity up on the hill, up on Los Alamos, with men going south to the Alamogordo site. I find it good to go up to the mesas and look out on the levels above and look across the world and into the past. Even now, as I feel the warm sunshine, the smell of pine needles, the howl of the wind in the trees, I am filled with a piece of this little canyon. What we do anywhere matters, but especially here, it matters very much. Mesas and mountains, rivers and trees, wind and rains are as sensitive to the actions and thoughts of we humans as we are to their forces. They take into themselves what we give off and give it out again. So I am brought into Los Alamos through the language, poetry, food of a white woman who moves west to take care of her health and lives among the Pueblo. And I elevate her in a piece. I'd like to just read one more thing because I think it brings then to a closure a little bit about our title and how our fathers fit into this, and perhaps some other things grow. So I consider rehearsing not quite sacred, but as beautiful a time as any I can imagine. And I treat it for its own sake, not only because I'm trying to make something happen, which of course we are. So there's a lot of things we do in rehearsal that never make it to the stage, and I never mind. I always think multiple outcomes for the same research, and this talk is one of them. So I had all the dancers had to do their origin stories. And because I was interested in the biblical fragments and all the old scrolls that lead us to what it becomes the Torah in my tradition, there's no punctuation, there's no periods, there's no nothing. So everybody had to write their biography that way. There's a little bit from mine. I've adapted it some so you guys can follow it, but it was basically a run-on sentence. And then, Cristobal, I will hand this to you.
Okay.
So you want to know my origins. It's hard to know where to begin, as there's always an earlier place to start. I guess I'd pick Catherine the Great, who was great, and also put all the Russian Jews into the ghettos, which made my grandfather's grandfather so angry. I think that is when the idea to come to America began, which my grandfather eventually did, escaping the army and bringing his love of opera with him to Milwaukee, where he married another Russian Jew who died in the 1970 1917 pandemic, leaving my 6-month-old father and his twin sister to be brought up by his mother's 6 sisters, all who felt so sorry for him that he, as he liked to tell it, they just gave him whatever food they had. And so by that time he volunteered for the war. He was still unmarried, which is why he went to the classical music room at the USO in San Francisco just before shipping out. In the meantime, my grandfather on my mother's side left his wife, my grandmother, to become a Rosicrucian in Alaska, which is why she was raising my mother and her sister alone. She wanted them to be very cultured, so she made sure that they knew classical music. But she also pressured my mother to be as smart as possible, and she made her work in the artificial flower store in the Sir Francis Drake Hotel that she ran, and my mother hated that, which is why she was probably so unhappy. This doesn't explain why the man she was supposed to marry was one of the first people to jump off the new Golden Gate Bridge, which is why my mother was still single when she went to be the DJ at the classical music room of the USO in San Francisco. My mother got them opera tickets and they married 3 weeks later with having one home-cooked meal that my grandmother made, even though she said it was my mother's cooking. My mother really never liked to cook, but it does explain how my older brother came into the world. You have to wait to the end of the war, however, to get to my birth. My father was with the ski troops in Italy, and when they won that war, they put all those soldiers on boats to send them to the Pacific, where the statistics for death were quite high. All the guys thought they had survived one front only to be killed in another. And so my father always said to me, "You are on this earth because of the bomb." And so I get ready now, everybody, to pass the stories and the storytelling to Cristobal. I just want to tell you 2 quick things about Cristobal. They're related. One is that when I met Cristobal, have the joy of spending time with him, I learned to slow down. In fact, we did a project together on 2 treadmills, walking side by side, being filmed and talking. And I just want you all to know that Cristobal walked so slowly, I could not keep up. The second thing I would say is that I listen to Radiolab in pieces. Like when I'm in the car, I get little flashes of it. And I was listening to one a while ago, and they were saying that the Earth used to spin faster. And then we got a moon. And when we got our moon, the Earth slowed down. So I just want to say to all of you, get a moon, settle down, get ready for Cristobal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz, for sharing your stories with us. It's incredibly humbling for me. I want to share with you post-commodities advice to art students so that I can get started here today. This is the gist of what we oftentimes share with our students. When you have the opportunity to meet with someone who you perceive or assume to be of positive consequence to your life, try to extend your visit with them so that it exceeds well beyond the time initially agreed upon. Liz is one of the people in my life who I always try to do this to. And I'm humbled to be here and with you, Liz. And I want to go ahead and jump in and tell you a little bit about what it was like growing up in northern New Mexico, where I'm from. Before I begin, I wish to share with you that after some consideration, Liz and I agreed that we would refrain from using visual imagery to tell our stories. For this keynote, our intentions are to honor our ancestors by telling you stories while relying on the power of oratory. We hope you will use your imaginations and also consider the narrative convergences and narrative dysfunctions, narrative divergences, and narrative congruencies that exist within our stories and our stories in relationship to each other while in great proximity. I will now proceed to share with you 4 short stories from my life while growing up in North Central New Mexico. Again, my position and accountability here is that I am mestizo of the Genisaro, Manito, Pueblo, and Chicano heritages of Northern New Mexico. I represent a mestizo perspective. I share with you a mestizo lens, but not the mestizo perspective or the mestizo lens. Drawing from the spirit of cuentos, I will tell you these stories through a certain aesthetic of prose and poetry. As I read, I encourage you to listen deeply while considering and allowing yourself to be open to the spirit of language. So as Liz and I are laboring here, telling you our stories, we would also like to invite you in the spirit of reciprocity to also labor as well. Only I think your job is harder than ours because you are the listener. And listening is hard. Listening is challenging. And afterward, after I finish, I will unpack for you and Liz the basic meaning of these short stories. And finally, with this collective comprehension, I will read these brief narratives one more time, uninterrupted. Okay. So for the second half of this keynote, Liz and I will enter into conversation as well as take questions from the audience. And thank you, everyone. It's an honor for us to be here with you today. Thank you, Irina Aristarkova, Jane Prophet, SLSA, and thank you, Liz, for sharing your stories and knowledge with us. And thank you all for being here with us today. There's a great plateau that forms the feet of Jacoma, a place of ashen cliffs and hollowed dwellings, with earthen wombs and of great houses. And below that, there is a river where we live. From this vantage, I look due south and west toward the Valle Caldera. I notice a tower. The scaffold rises high upon Pajarito Plateau. Its presence is out of context. This tower is a trick. Standing indifferent, the red structure is familiar but strange. Sonic beams crack upon the land, and imminence reverberates in my bones. The enormous scaffold buckles at the base and begins to collapse toward the ground. Upon impact, a light reduces everything, and I could never be in that world again. Every night, I woke up dead when I was a child. It was pitch black. It feels like forever. The science, tourism, fires, suicide, and a heroin-induced sense of well-being. From dreams to wind, an escape hatch loop. From dreams to wind, an escape hatch loop. When the thunder claps, You can hear the sky as if it were a chamber. The rain occasionally cools the land, and the irradiated arroyos pour to the valley below. But isn't it worth the sacrifice to know? They ask. They always ask. There was a building I used to pass that does not respect the sovereignty of context. In my memory, the structure, built at the threshold of forest and desert, appears as solid concrete. It looks industrial, like a factory, but there are no windows and doors. There are no pitched roofs, but only what looks like cubes cast in concrete, cast and cracking. Within a fortified perimeter, there lives an albino deer, its body casting long, skewed shadows along the eastern elevation of this house. Irradiated, the building is entombed and futile. It is a theory of permanence. From this, I learned that perhaps those who are not of this land are confused by it. Very near this house lie the foundations of a Puye dwelling. My father was commissioned to fold metal for reasons unknown to him. My mother was commissioned to make a Rio Grande weaving for nuclear diplomacy. My father, folding metal, got cancer attributed to the dreams of scientists, deprivation of self, deprivation of meaning. Before dying, he folded metal into hundreds of crosses and reflected on his indigenous roots. His mother from Huachupangue. My mother quit weaving. Her father from the Embudo. I used to walk the high desert. The arroyos were lonely. There was sweat, mucus, mocos, and chicharras crying for chingazos. My father taught me to hunt in the hills. I was a predator of rabbits, but I feared rabbit dogs. I attracted dust and bugs and could smell tecolotes. My instincts made me amongst the chamisos. I was like hantavirus blowing off a hill. Sometimes I hear El Defunto's laughter and it moves me across allergies. I cannot swim rivers. And I learned, and as I dreamed of El Bosque, I traveled arroyos. Sometimes I gathered chimaha and I would dry the root and chew. One summer, I saw a snake turn bright red. I shot that snake in the neck and I ran for my life. Ponte trucha, cabrón. El desierto es mi sangre. And I was in my blood. Okay, I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to unpack this fairly quickly for you and our audience. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. At the beginning, there's a great plateau that forms the feet of Chacoma, a place of ashen cliffs and hollow dwellings. And I'm talking about an area in northern New Mexico where Los Alamos National Laboratory exists, and the important site of the Manhattan Project. I grew up just about 40 miles north of this area. And I'm talking about this place of being not only the site, an important site of the Manhattan Project, but it is a very sacred place to Pueblo people. And it is a former place where our ancestors once lived. And so what happens is I'm sharing you a story about a tower that I noticed that there was a tower, and it was familiar because it's like a radio tower. It's scaffolded, it's red, it's out of place. It doesn't belong there. It does not respect the land. It does not respect the history of my people, but it is there nonetheless. It's a trick. It's like a trickster. And what ends up happening is that this, I see this tower buckle, and it starts to fall towards the earth. And when it hits the earth, there's a bright, blinding light. And then at that moment, I wake up. I used to be a child. When I was a child, I used to have this dream. It was a recurring dream. I would wake up, and in New Mexico, it's very dark. It's not like living in the city, right? So it's pitch black. So you would wake up from the light to blackness. And then this would be something that would happen to me over and over again. It would represent anxieties I imagine that I had being a kid growing up during the Cold War. And then I go on to talk about what forever feels like, the consequences of Cold War, the consequences of colonization, of indigenous people, the science, the tourism, the fires, suicide. Suicide is an important thing. A lot of the youth who grew up in Los Alamos, they had a very high suicide rate per capita, where a lot of young people, the scientists or engineers, various workers who worked at the lab would jump into the canyons. And at the same time, as a young people, mostly young white, almost like suburban children would jump off of these cliffs. Then you had the indigenous people and brown people, Chicano people, Hispanic people down in the valley below, who would experience an epidemic of heroin. Yeah. And I think a lot about the role, of colonization, of destabilizing communities and removing communities from their food systems with the promise of upward economic mobility. And so I question this idea from dreams to wind. Everything starts out with a dream, with an idea. It gets set into wind, coming from our mouths and then eventually into many times some kind of physical manifestation. And I question the idea of an escape hatch. I question the idea of nuclear research or jumpstarting nuclear energy as a short-term solution to the energy crisis in relationship to global warming. And I think about and characterize it as a loop because it's an echo chamber of people having conversations with themselves. It's led to a lot of unintended consequences in the world. So I describe where I'm from a little bit, and I share a little bit about the ways in which the lands are irradiated and the kinds of the sort of national site of sacrifice mentality that I often encounter with scientists who come to me with positivism and would listen to my story and ask the question, well, isn't it worth the sacrifice to know? It's interesting, right? When the sacrifice is when the cost is paid by another who's sacrificing, right? And certainly I don't imagine would be their families.
Other than their children jumping off cliffs.
Right. And that's actually never a question that I put back on to scientists because I don't think that's ethical. I think it would be an immoral rhetorical move to make. But I go on to describe a building. This is an irradiated building that I witnessed as a young as a teenager that had been encased in concrete, had been irradiated, and it was a containment site. And I talk about having seen an albino deer there next to this building, casting its shadow and reflecting upon the sacredness of this place and sort of this profound, this profane object in this context. And thinking about time and the passing of time and how our structures, our buildings are represent theories. This is a metaphor by which we live. This is argued by this great linguists, Lakoff and Johnson. And we see that we understand as Indigenous people that a theory of permanence is futile in a place of massive volcanic activity and just dramatic erosion. And so I reflect on the foundations of homes by my ancestor in relationship to this building that seems to proclaim that it can stand the test of time. It's confused by the land. It doesn't understand the land. And then I go on to talk about my father being commissioned. My father worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory. He was a metal fabricator and a metallurgist. And he worked under the conditions of secrecy where he would be commissioned to make things, but most of the time didn't know what they were for. And eventually my mother was commissioned to weave a rug, a traditional Indigenous rug, for an envoy to the former Soviet Union to discuss nuclear diplomacy. This was about a time when disarmament was starting to become a conversation. And eventually my father did get cancer and pass away, and his illness is attributed to exposure to various things while working. And its consequence, its loss, and my mother no longer weaves. My father is gone. And my father spent his last days really thinking very deeply about his Indigenous roots and where his mother is from and his grandparents are from. And it was interesting to me how he did that while making crosses and sort of the syncretism between worldview that happened in northern New Mexico and some of it through violence, unfortunately. And so then I don't like damage-centered narratives, and I don't like trauma drama. And so that's not what I'm doing here. And so I share a final story about what it's like being a child growing up in northern New Mexico, and I talk about my time, my walks as a child out in the desert. And what I do is I provide a counter narrative to many people who come to New Mexico, like George O'Keeffe, for example, and who oftentimes like to tell very romantic narratives of the land and boost the notion of a land of enchantment and creating mythologies that are used by the capitalist superstructure to fetishize my people and the lands by which we're from, which has also contributed to these crimes. And so I think we're really running out of time. We're running a little low on time. And what I'm going to do here is I'm gonna read these stories one more time. They're going to be a little more speedy, and I sort of unpacked some of the narratives for everyone here today. And now I would like for you to listen again, having a little more insight into what these stories are about. Okay, so here we go. There is a great plateau that forms the feet of Jacoma, a place of ashen cliffs and hollowed dwellings with earthen wombs and what's left of great houses. And below that, there is a river where we live. From this vantage, I look due south and west toward the Valle Caldera. I notice a tower. The scaffold rises high upon Pajarito Plateau. Its presence is out of context. This tower is a trick. Standing indifferent, the red structure, it's familiar but strange. Sonic booms crack upon the land. Should I say sonic booms crack? Yes, crack upon the land, and imminence reverberates in my bones. The enormous scaffold buckles at the base and begins to collapse toward the ground. Upon impact, the light reduces everything, and I could never be in that world again. Every night I woke up dead when I was a child. It was pitch black. It feels like forever, the science, tourism, fires, suicide, and a heroin-induced sense of well-being. From dreams to wind, an escape hatch loop. When the thunder claps, you can hear the sky as if it were a chamber. The rain occasionally cools the land, and the irradiated arroyos pour to the valley below. But isn't it worth the sacrifice to know? They always ask. There was a building I used to pass that does not respect the sovereignty of context. In my memory, the structure built at the threshold of forest and desert appears as solid concrete. It looks industrial, like a factory, but there are no windows and doors. There are no pitched roofs, but only what looks like cubes cast and cracking. Within a fortified perimeter, there lives an albino deer, its body casting long skewed shadows along the eastern elevation of this house. Irradiated, the building is entombed and futile. It is a theory of permanence. From this, I learned that perhaps those who are not of this land are confused by it. Very near to this house lie the foundations of a Puye dwelling. My father was commissioned to fold metal for reasons unknown to him. My mother was commissioned to make a Rio Grande weaving for nuclear diplomacy. My father got cancer attributed to the dreams of scientists. Deprivation of self, deprivation of meaning. Before dying, he folded metal into hundreds of crosses and reflected on his indigenous roots. His mother from Huachupangue. My mother quit weaving. Her father from the Embudo. I used to walk the high desert. This is the self-determination part of this story, okay? I used to walk the high desert. The arroyos were lonely. There was sweat, mucus, and chicharras crying for chingazos. My father taught me to hunt in the hills. I was a predator of rabbits, but I feared rabid dogs. I attracted dust and bugs and could smell tecolotes. My instincts made me amongst the chamisos. I was like hantavirus blowing off a hill. Sometimes I hear El Defunto's laughter, and it moves me across allergies. I cannot swim rivers, and I dreamed of El Bosque as I traveled arroyos. Sometimes I gathered chimaha, some medicine, and I would dry the root and chew. One summer, I saw a snake turn bright red. I shot that snake in the neck, and I ran for my life. Ponte trucha, cabrón. El desierto es mi sangre, and I was in my blood.
It's, I just want to say it's wonderful to hear the stories again, and also scary and also difficult and also challenging. A couple things this time around that I heard, and I know we want to hear from everybody and get questions and everything, but I'll just say this story of permanence this time really struck me.
Oh,
and how your people understand impermanence from the land itself, teaching you through what the land does. And I thought that was amazing. And again, as maybe people noticed, but even the quick little exchange partway through where we were discussing the rhetorical ethics of constraint and whether you would ever say to one of those scientists, and how you caught me up in that. And that's exactly what I mean about spending time with you, is that I'm always discovering, well, ethical corners, moral turns that I have to reconsider. So
thank you. Thank you for that,
Thank you.
Liz. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Jane,
Yeah.
would you like to join us? Or I think you've joined us, maybe?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you both so much. What an amazing dialogue and conversation, not only verbally, but the interweaving and the offsets between your two stories and histories. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane.
So members of the audience who have been actively listening, we'd love to have your questions. Please post them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. Some people have already posted their thanks for the talk. We don't have any questions just yet. I'm sure there's quite a lot for people to absorb. Maybe while we wait, I'd like to pose a question just while we wait for others to gather their thoughts. Christabel, I was thinking about the way that when you're working with Cadell Twist as post-commodity, you've said that you, quote, intentionally break predetermined products or structures in order to modify their original use and to inspire alternative outcomes. And I was thinking about that a lot as both of you were speaking, but especially during the stories that you were telling. And I wonder if you might be able to expand on that in relationship to how we might break up or modify that echo chamber that you talked about. How might we break up and modify those echo chamber conversations about nuclear energy being a solution to climate change now?
That's a really beautiful and excellent question.
Nice connecting thread.
Yes. Well, one of the things that we think a lot about in post-commodity is the importance and the role of hacking as an act of self-determination, because we think a lot about not only from the perspective of like the digital world, but also the physical world as well, because products of capitalism and ideas of capitalism are a lot of what we experience is exogenous, like historically exogenous, like coming into the communities where we're from, proliferating the communities where we're from through acts of colonization. And so one of the ways that we can maintain our self-determination is to subvert these the original intended uses of these things as a way to align them more aspire to more ideally align them to the life ways and the worldviews by which we were raised. And so that becomes a very useful strategy for interpreting the world in a way that is critical, but also in a way that leads to transformation, different kinds of transformations, transformation of material, transformation of institutions, transformation of policies, or even economies. And I think that one of the things that is really important about hacking is that it provides us in respect or in relationship to nuclear energy as a short-term solution to energy in a context of warming planet is that we kind of, what hacking does is it breaks our assumptions about what we think is true in the world. And and what we think is true, by the way, we oftentimes hold these things very sacred. What we think is true is very important to us. And because we think it's true, we're usually not very amenable to questioning it. We don't question what we believe to be true. And so hacking is a kind of questioning of truth. It's a questioning of the chauvinisms and the assumptions that we embody and that we've been disciplined to believe in and embody. And so I think that if we can be open to breaking into our own, the systems that we maintain and create, that we might actually begin to recover new knowledge that represents things that we wouldn't otherwise encounter through any other methodology.
And, you know, I would add that oddly, it's not exactly hacking. I hadn't thought about it as hacking, but I do think embodiment also is an interesting way that affects people to have to think about things. So for example, in the defense pieces, there was one about the M1 tank, and maybe you don't know this or not, but the M1 tank has an 18-foot blind spot in front of it. So if you're driving the tank, you can't see. So when I did that, I like became the tank, and then I would drive my whole body. I was like on the ground, you know, sort of in my head into the side of the theater, wherever I was, like just bang into the theater. And always, I mean, people would laugh, but then they would be in line, especially young people, especially college students line up. It's like, is that true? Is that true? Wait, is that true? And I think it was my bashing my head actually is kind of hacking. Like, wait a minute, you guys, you see this? It's body. It's the body. It doesn't quite get at the capitalism question, but I do think we get so disembodied that we allow these thoughts to occur without it, like, you know, being blood, muscle, and bone. So
I think that's so important. The embodiment aspect of this is the hacking is always in relationship to land as a mediator of people's relationships, but also land as a mediator of the body, and the idea that the body is that embodiment is such an important consideration in hacking. And you said something really important. You said that when you would bang your body into the wall, that the audience there would be some laughing in the audience, maybe some chuckling, and maybe some of that chuckling might have been discomfort, or some of that chuckling might have been like, oh my God, there's a comedy. And that's I think one of the key aspects of hacking is to create a comedy. Because that's that when you bring the presence of tricking or a trickster or a comedian or even a fool, like in the Western traditions, into the pedagogical context, it signifies an opportunity for learning, for education.
Thank you. We have a few questions, and I'm going to take them slightly out of order because one follows on neatly from this conversation, and then I'm going to, if you don't mind, bring in a group together of questions. So somebody's referred to this most recent part of the discussion and the conversation about hacking and transformation, and saying that, you know, the work of hacking and transformation seems, we could think of it as a partial mission for nuclear and other toxic systems non-proliferation. And they particularly asked if Liz has any comments about that.
I could use a little, I could use a little more explanation about the question. I mean, for me, transformation is an interesting word. I don't use it that often, even though I see it all around when people allow themselves to come into their bodies. But Jane, either can you say more, or can you say more and help me understand? Because I want to get to the nut of that question. I don't think I can.
Maybe Jane, if you can break the question into a couple of pieces for us. Sorry, we're putting you on the spot there.
No, that's okay.
I think
if the person that asked that question could maybe, if you'd like to kind of break it down and put it back into the Q&A, that would be great. I think I'll tell you what my interpretation of the question was that hacking as a or hacking the conversation, or hacking the discourse around nuclear being something that can save us as we experience climate change due to an over dependence on fossil fuels. If we could hack that conversation in some way, are we sort of, does that hack enable us to get to non-proliferation? But that's my interpretation. It may not have been the original intent.
Yeah, from my perspective, the answer is yes. But the important part of the question and the way that you paraphrased it or rephrased it, Jane, is the we. Who is the we we're talking about here? And so I don't think just anyone can hack it. I think indigenous peoples of the Americas can hack it. I think people who are not at the ideation, table can hack it, because hacking implies that someone is breaking in. And oftentimes when somebody is breaking in, they're breaking in from the outside, unless they're an imposter or a dissenter. What really the issue is that we need to learn, and this comes from the practice of post-commodity. We have to get better at syncretizing our worldviews. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is to practice. And it isn't until you bring other worldviews to the table that other ideas and other perspectives proliferate. If we just have one worldview trying to dominate all other worldviews, it's just not going to happen. You're not going to see hacking, because you can't. It's like a loop. You're trying to apply a worldview that's created disparities while at the same time try to save the world using the same philosophies, the same ideologies, and the same perceptions, big D discourses, ways of being, doing, believing, valuing combinations are being recycled back into the conversation. We really need to turn this conversation. We need to hack it with voices, diverse voices from all around the world.
I would also just say that Cristobal's now twice used the word syncretic, and that this idea is one, though it's so valuable to set it up possibly in opposition to colonization, or in opposition to the melting pot, and in opposition to any number of ways in which we come to think about this. And it isn't until I moved to the Southwest that I began to understand it at a much deeper level, and how at a belief system, a religious system, knowledge systems, and how our universities value them, and how they where they put their energies, how pedagogy works within our institutions. How could we actually do that practicing? What would it take to practice that? Because it does, in my mind, require practice at a very personal level, and then of course at this larger level that we're having a conversation about.
Thank you. I think we might just change direction a little bit, and I'm going to try and combine 3 comments or questions, because they seem to belong together in some way. So different people have asked about whether you intend to collaborate or do already collaborate together creatively. Whether you're what collaboration will you be making with these stories is one question. aligned to that or connected to that is a curiosity about whether you have spoken together publicly before, and if you're working on any creative projects together. Partly because of the comment that this is a very urgent dialogue, and that you have seemed to have found a unique form to engage in that dialogue and to engage us as active listeners in that dialogue. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, let's see. If we just for a minute inhabit an artist's life as big and wide, then we've been collaborating since we met. What were the ground rules of that? How did that, not just how we met, but what did we do to nourish, support, and breathe in the relationship? And here, I know we talk about relationship, or maybe we don't talk about it enough, but relationship's not just exchange. It's so much deeper, and the kind of time that we've taken to be with each other, to take walks, to listen, to talk, to discover. And I'm just advocating that we've been in it. Now, what are the outcomes of it? What do we want to do with it? This is the first time we've done this together, and it's been exhilarating and very emotional. We've taken turns on the emotional front. I came in, let's, and then Cristobal totally took apart Edith Warner. I had to go home and reconceive the whole way in which, well, the past is in front of me. What had I done? And what was that? What was my part in that? And then you let me know that actually you connected Edith Warner to your father. And then a whole thing happened. Yeah. So it's interesting to me that you're feeling there's something happening. I'm excited about that. Where we might go with this is we're partly getting information from you all. But Cristobal, what would you say?
This particular presentation is something that I knew I was going to do about nearly 12 years ago when my father passed away. And I was a doctoral student at the time. And you may imagine it was his passing. I had a very close relationship with my father. So it's not easy to go public with things that are so personal and that are so really just meant for me and my father and my family. Going public, it's part of, there's a voice inside me that says, but you owe it to your family and you owe it to people because these are really serious issues. This is serious subject matter. And the role of testimony is, one of the most powerful tools we have in society, as long as we are allowing ourselves to listen to the stories of others. And we allow ourselves to believe in the stories of others. And I have been in very important dialogues with Liz for several years now, and when I was asked to do this keynote, I immediately thought of Liz co-presenting this keynote with me because of the very rich knowledge that you embody, Liz, and throughout your career, what you've achieved, especially with engaging these issues very generatively and generously. And I felt like your engagement was as any artist's engagement should be, which is human. And so full of self-implication. Some of us, when we do our work, we only have certain awareness, and then there's a lot of other blind spots too. We only know what we can know, right? We're only human. And I immediately wanted to have this happen. I thought I believed in it, but I also, because Liz is a person who I trust, a dear friend of mine. You are, Liz, are a very dear friend of mine. I felt like having a dear friend by my side as I tell this story will give me the strength I needed to tell it. And so I think we draw strength from one another, and I think that's the true, maybe perhaps the true spirit of what can, who knows what it leads to, right? But certainly leads to some set of destinations, I'm sure. This being one, for sure, for certain.
I think
I mean, I think just sort of having been in the background, but watching the two of you as you prepared for today, I just also want to say that the two of you being physically together in the same space, I know you've both made quite a big effort for us to have this experience with you sitting together. I think it's really profound. I think it calls in all of your prior experience and knowledges about the importance of embodiment and sharing a physical space in our bodies together. So I want to thank you very much for that, for actually making that happen in that way. Another question that's come in is really, I think, somebody who resonates strongly, Christabel, with your lived experience. So it's an anonymous attendee. I'm just going to read out the question now. Yeah. Christabel, I attended IZEA in New Mexico some years ago now. A few artists decided to go for a tour to Los Alamos, and they invited me to join them. I couldn't go near the place or understand why they wanted to go. I couldn't go near the place or understand why they wanted to go there because I'm someone from Aotearoa in New Zealand, and the resistance or the horror of nuclear energy in the Pacific is woven into my identity. Mm-hmm. Christabel, for you who are from this wonderful but injured land, the wonderful but injured land has taught me how to understand how one might return to this place. So I think your stories are a teaching for people that want to find a way to return to injured but beautiful lands that are close to their hearts and their origins. The question part of this is around the value of an iterative process of storytelling, unpacking, then retelling. How does repetition or return function in your practice?
Oh, that's so awesome.
Such a great question.
Thank you, whoever sent that in.
That's a beautiful question.
So to whomever I'm speaking and the audience and Liz. Yeah. Well, the one thing I want to just share is that like I mentioned earlier, I really try to resist these like damage-centered narratives, and so the land has been operated or has been altered by human activity, but in time the land takes care of itself. The land is a keeper of knowledge, and if whether or not we are open and learning from and recovering knowledge and helping steward land, that if whether or not that's happening, that so in some cases it does, in some cases it doesn't. And there's more to the place than the theater of presence of a theater of war, right? This is the place of the Puye people. This is a very very ancient, a place of a very ongoing civilization that goes back all the way since time immemorial. And that in itself is got to be the greatest reason to visit. And so I hope that if you ever find yourself in northern New Mexico again, that you will go, because you will see the strength of the land, and you will understand that that there is a lot more to it than some of these latest human interventions. Now, in terms of repetition, repetition in my practice is central. It's central to the work of post-commodity, and it's central to my work in all the various collaborations that I'm a part of. And post-commodity is my life. That is my central focus as an artist. And conversations have to be had over and over and over again, because in a collective, and the kind of collective that we have, consensual meaning making is of highest importance. And in order to build consensus, in order to co-determine meaning together, we have to go through ideas repetitiously over and over and over and over again, unpacking, modifying, hacking, doing it again, reiterative, satisficing, building upon, subtracting, adding. And that's why it takes years to make a work. That's why it takes post-commodity years to make a work. And to be honest, these processes are not what concern us in the collective. We are an idea-driven collective. It's the idea for us that matters. I guess just one last thing really quick. We are how we were raised. And so our process is how we were raised.
I just want to say, though, that there are some things, if I can speak about you for a minute with you sitting right here, but, I grew up kind of in a modern world, but moved to postmodernism. And part of that postmodern shift included this idea, I'll do my thing, you do your thing. If you get what I'm doing, fine. If you don't get what I'm, don't worry. I want everybody to get their own thing. Okay, Cristobal comes along and says something to this effect. I'm paraphrasing you. Art doesn't speak for itself. Artists speak for themselves. And it's Cristobal's insistence on, there's still plenty of room for each and every one of you to find your way into the dreams. He told us the Dark Knight, so there's the Red Snake, there's so many ways in. But you did tell us some ways that we could come along with you if we wanted to. And I think that that's in the telling, the unpacking and the retelling. And I think that is very special and different from a lot of the postmodern rhetoric, at least that goes on in contemporary dance and contemporary theater. And perhaps one of those syncretic ideas that we can begin to find if we can bring ourselves together is to understand, actually, no, we have to return to this way of storytelling.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
at this point, I know there's some final questions or comments from the conference itself, but Cristobal, I wanted to come back to you before we finish to ask if you could share with us any conclusions that you would like to really leave us with from the stories that you shared today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Jane. Well, I feel like no matter the aspirations among scientists, artists, applied scientists, citizens, governments, or corporations to achieve nuclear excellence or an origins narrative, the future of these endeavors will forever be haunted and vexed by all of the intended and unintended damage it has caused for people and land. It will forever be haunted by the world-ending potential it has manifest on Earth, and by its historical and ongoing contributions to genocide and geocide in our world. In the Americas, The colonial rhetoric is that the land was empty and represented a terra nullius. Such is the world of science and art, a territory where communities of interest claim that we are only beholden and free to imagine ourselves into the future, another terra nullius. However, beyond the colonial fog, there are those of us who see the obviousness that the present and future are constantly collapsing along the same continuum of the past, and that no one is truly free to imagine without being haunted by what we are guilty of. In the context of nuclear energy and physics, how much suffering does it require for humans to listen to one another? In the context of origins, how many resources must be spent on a creation story, given that thousands of cultures have created them at a fraction of the cost? And those are the questions I wish to leave us all with today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
So
Jane.
to conclude this particular session, in closing, I want to thank Cristobal Martinez and Liz Lerman so much from Stamps for being part of SLSA Energy, for your contributions through your speaking and your active listening to one another, and for the way you've brought in the questions and comments. To those of you that have been participating in the webinar by so actively listening, thank you so much for your energy and your attention, and for the really nuanced questions that you offered up. We're very, very grateful for that. I'm going to hand over in a moment to the SLSA Energy Conference Coordinator, my colleague, Professor Irina Aristarkova. But before I do that, I want to extend some very, very special thanks to Irina from myself and everybody that has been texting and messaging me about the pleasure and the energy that they've got from the conference and the energy that they felt inspired to contribute to the conference. Irina, thank you so much for helping make this happen, for having brought us all together. I'm hugely grateful. Thank you very much. And now would you like to say something as we close the conference?
Thank you so much, Jean. Thank you so much, Cristobal and Liz. That's been incredible. Thank you all who continued with and who've been part of this SLSA. And tonight, I just want to once again say that behind me is, from what I started this morning, behind me is a poster made by Cyber Partisans, is their logo of Belarus resistant movement to the dictator Lukashenko. In solidarity with them, I'm keeping their logo as they, who are the artists, are continuing to flee the country and continuing to be arrested, and technologies are used to arrest them. And we hope that there will be democracy there in Belarus one day, and that the Russian state will stop colonizing that space, including with its nuclear power, as we learned from one of the great presentations at this SLSA. So on a positive note, I would like to end by thanking our incredible technical team. We have here two leaders who made it all happen. Sue Shavgen, if you can show yourself, if you are there, Sue. Hi, and Caitlin De Virgilio. We are all here. I'm going to put my virtual background. We're sitting right next to each other in obscure offices on campus of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Thank you all again so much. And let's continue, as Lisa Nakamura said, our digital labor of repair. So thank you so much, and good night.
There is a sensorium closing sound performance that some of you might want to take part in. It is the tradition at SLSA for everybody to dance, no matter how accomplished they are. So please attend and dance in the comfort of your own homes. Thank you.
Good night. And good morning for those of you who are in New Zealand.